Day 3 was a pretty significant day for the fact that the Florida House of Representatives held its first kind of substantive floor session where they began passing bills out, which is you can only pass bills out when the legislature is in session. And the very first bill that the Florida House of Representatives passed for the 2026 session was literally written by lobbyists for a giant corporation. In this case, that corporation is the Mosaic Company, the big phosphate mining and fertilizer manufacturing company that strip mines vast swaths of land south of Tampa, inland parts of the state south of Tampa, and turns all the phosphate rock it mines turns it into ingredients for fertilizer at these chemical factories near Tampa and Lakeland. And so the first bill to come out of the House was House Bill 167. This was a bill designed to shield Mosaic from lawsuits brought by people exposed to elevated levels of radiation on former phosphate mines. The industry will tell you it's still perfectly safe. It's still within safe levels, although there are a couple of active lawsuits going about over this exact issue, including one against the Mosaic Company that is substantive enough that it has survived Mosaic's attempts to have it dismissed, and it's now like deep into litigation. And in the midst of this, along comes House Bill 167, which would essentially immunize the Mosaic Company against claims brought under this really strong environmental law. So you couldn't use what's called the Water Quality Assurance Act if you were bringing a case related to radiation exposure on former mines. It would even throw up roadblocks to just basic negligence suits. The idea here is to make it virtually impossible to successfully sue the Mosaic if you're a homeowner sickened by radiation exposure living in a home that was built on a former phosphate mine. That's House Bill 167, first bill out of the chute in the Florida House of Representatives this year. It heads to the Senate, where it sure looks like it's going to pass. This issue has been a priority of Senate President Ben Albritton, whose district includes most of Mosaic's operations and land holdings. So what an auspicious first bill of the year. Hello, and welcome to Seeking Rents, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garcia. I am the publisher of Seeking Rents, which is a newsletter in Florida about state politics, but with a particular focus on the ways that big businesses and other special interests influence public policy in this state. That name, Seeking Rents, comes from a term in economics called rent seeking. And rent seeking is what's happening when someone with lots of wealth and influence, like a big business or a billionaire, uses their wealth and influence to get laws changed in their favor in a way that allows them to capture even more wealth and influence for themselves, usually at the expense of someone else. So this is going to be an update from Day 3 of the Florida Legislature's 2026 legislative session. Legislative sessions typically go 60 days, so in theory this should have been Day 3 of 60, although who on earth knows how long this year's legislative session is going to last, or how often Florida lawmakers will be coming back to Tallahassee for special sessions. Things are off to a chilly and inauspicious start in Tallahassee so far this year. I don't think it's any secret that I have, over the years, had my let's say concerns about the outsized influence that a handful of giant corporations and enormous campaign contributors have in the Florida legislature and have had for decades, certainly for the 25 years that I've been doing this. I mean, it's essentially the reason why I started Seeking Rents, or that's where the name comes from, is this kind of crazy influence these handful of companies have in this process. But even I couldn't have come up with something more on the nose than this. The very first bill that the Florida House of Representatives passed for the 2026 session was literally written by lobbyists for a giant corporation. That passed the House, by the way, 87-24, which means a significant chunk of the House Democratic caucus voted for that bill too. So, particularly the big regulated industry companies, the companies like Mosaic or the sugar companies or the utility companies, they're really intentional about giving money not just to Republicans who have supermajorities, but also to some Democratic legislators, particularly Democrats in super safe seats where a Republican couldn't win anyway. And as you can see, that buys a lot of bipartisan support for bills like House Bill 167. So there were a number of bills to come out of the House on Thursday. The Mosaic bill just happened to be the first one. But another one that I think is super alarming to come out of the House on Thursday was House Bill 289. This is another piece of legislation we have talked about quite a bit on the podcast. It's essentially an extreme anti-abortion bill, but kind of masquerading as a wrongful death bill. And this is the legislation that would give a fertilized egg some of the same civil legal rights as a living human child. And the idea is it would enable someone to file a wrongful death lawsuit on behalf of a fertilized egg if a pregnancy is lost or terminated, and the person claims there was wrongdoing in this. And sort of at a basic level, it is designed to put abortion providers at risk of legal exposure, civil liability exposure, to deter them from even practicing in the state, because all it could take, you could have an abusive ex-partner that wields one of these lawsuits against a doctor who performs an abortion on their victim, essentially. But it's actually far more significant than this. This is part of, as we have discussed on this quite a bit, this is part of a long-running conservative effort to sort of establish in law, that under the eyes of the law, that a fertilized egg from the moment of conception is legally the exact same thing as a living human being, and to then weaponize this concept of personhood to use the courts to basically empower a guy like James Uthmeier, the state's attorney general, to then go to court and make these arguments that would result in court rulings that essentially ban all abortion. They know straight out banning abortion is politically toxic in a state where 57% of voters just voted to protect abortion rights. So this is a backdoor way to get courts to do it instead. And it goes beyond abortion. You personhood laws and personhood legal arguments can end up leading to erosions of all kinds of issues of reproductive health, from in vitro fertilization to surrogacy to contraceptive care. This is a really, really sort of far-reaching bill, and the debate around this is always just so maddening. And it's like one of the things you will hear from the supporters in the legislature about this in these debates. They have this like see no evil, hear no evil attitude. They're like, this bill has nothing to do with abortion, and it's like, oh really? Because all the fucking anti-abortion groups sure seem to think it has everything to do with abortion. They're all thrilled about this. They're all thrilled about what this means towards the long-term effort to ban abortion entirely in any circumstance. Doesn't matter. Rape, incest, doesn't matter. All abortion could be banned if you can fully sort of weaponize personhood legal argument. So this is an abortion bill, and don't let any of the supporters of it gaslight you into thinking it's anything else. So that bill comes out of the House on a 76-34 vote, goes to the Senate, where, it seems to be in trouble. I think we've mentioned this before, that the matching bill in the Senate has gone through one committee, but just barely. It was a 5-4 vote, which is always a sign of trouble in that chamber. But, as we've talked about before too, Florida's got this aggressively gerrymandered state legislature where, like, the vast majority of legislators never have to worry about a general election challenge. The only thing they ever have to worry about is being being outflanked on the right in most Republican seats. And when you've got a system designed that way, where all the incentives are to make sure you never let someone become more extreme than you to one side, to the right-hand side, the pressure to pass this bill is just going to keep growing. And it seems to me inevitable that this will eventually pass, or that a court will essentially rule it into law through like judicial fiat if they can't get it through the legislature. But this is a bill, goes out first day of the first day the Florida House is in full session. So, again, on one hand, doing a favor for a giant corporate contributor, on the other hand, trying to backdoor ban abortion. That is like the Florida legislature in a nutshell these days. One other bill that I think is probably worth talking about in this context is House Bill 133. This was another one of the bills to come out of the House on Thursday. And this would undo one of the bipartisan gun safety reforms that was enacted under former Governor Rick Scott by the legislature, which was still Republican controlled, by the way, after the 2018 mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. That was the shooter in that case was 19 years old, who had acquired a gun legally, who bought a gun legally. And so one of the changes they made after that was to raise the legal age to buy a firearm in Florida from 18 to 21. House Bill 133 would bring that back down to 18. So as I said, undo this bipartisan reform enacted after Parkland, which is, less than a decade ago. It's just like, it's a sign to just how much brains are melting that we're already going backwards on that. This bill, by the way, passed by a 74-37 vote. There were actually, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 Republicans, I believe, voted no. So it gives you a sense of just how unhinged this idea is. Although, also to speaking of just how lopsided the Florida legislature is, 74-37, I believe, if I did my checking right, that was the closest vote in the House on Thursday. I might be forgetting an amendment vote or something that was closer. I will say there was like a kind of a funny moment in this where one of the loonier members of the Florida House, a guy by the name of Rep. Dean Black, who's a Republican from I want to say like Fernandina Beach, definitely Northeast Florida. He started telling a story about like a Christmas where he got a gun as a gift. And like, as he told the story, it was like, he's telling the story of Ralphie from A Christmas Story. He's like putting himself into A Christmas Story and telling it like it's his own memory. Like he went through right down to like how he was nudged to look behind the tree and there was that long, slender box. It was like, what did you do? Did you like run off Black Bart's bandits afterwards? Did the Bumpus's hounds eat your Christmas turkey? It was wild. I suppose there's a world in which this guy Dean Black had like a Christmas as a child that was just like a mirror image of Ralphie's Christmas from A Christmas Story. Although I'm reminded of the fact that this guy gave one of the wildest speeches I've ever seen in another bill. I don't know if we ever talked about this on the podcast, but this was a couple of years ago when they passed, it's crazy, this is a law in Florida, Stand Your Ground for Bears, a bill allowing people to shoot bears that were, threatening their property, essentially. And in a committee hearing on that bill, this guy, Dean Black, gave a debate in favor of it where he essentially warned that bears were developing a taste for man flesh. And so we needed to start shooting them before they figured out that they were at the top of the food chain. It was, I've heard a lot of crazy debates in the legislature before. I had not been prepared to hear that like man-eating bears were evolving in our backyards and that one of our state reps is Ralphie from A Christmas Story. But there we go. At least it was a lighthearted moment on sort of a grim bill coming out of the legislature. This is another bill, by the way, that seems like it's in a lot of trouble in the Florida Senate. This is one the Senate has refused to pass, in part because I think Senate President Ben Albritton, when he's asked about it, if memory serves, he says he opposes it because law enforcement opposes it, which is whatever gets you there, great. But it's sort of like, boy, law enforcement has become like an argument of convenience in Republican circles in terms of like we hug law enforcement and we use them to justify certain things when we want to, but like, if they're standing in our way, like at the U.S. Capitol, then, who cares, right? So whatever the reason, House Bill 133, lowering the gun age, passes, lowering the legal age to buy a gun, passes the Florida House, probably stuck in the Florida Senate, but, the same logic that we talked about with gerrymandering applies here, that, the pressure to pass a bill like this, or if not do this, do something else sort of unhinged on unwinding gun safety stuff will continue to grow in Tallahassee. So, even if it doesn't pass this year, it's certainly not the last we've heard of this issue. And again, we've entered in this world where we're hitting a point where even when things get too extreme for the gerrymandered Florida legislature, then courts step in and do it by fiat. So who knows, we could see a court before too long just sort of declare the 21-year buying age unconstitutional and kick it back to 18 or something like that. I will say one sort of more positive bill that came out of the House on Thursday was House Bill 6003. And this is another bill we have talked about in past sessions. This is a bill to eliminate what is known as Florida's free kill law, which just by that name you can tell it's probably a bad law, right? And this closes what, I don't know if it's right to call it a loophole, but in my mind I think of it as a loophole where it essentially leaves a gap in the state's wrongful death laws that prevent someone from bringing a wrongful death lawsuit, like in a case where an adult without any children has been killed as a result of medical malpractice. Basically, the parents of a childless adult, can't bring a suit right now under Florida law, a wrongful death suit, if their child is killed as a result of medical malpractice. And similarly, the other part of this is if the adult children of a parent who dies, a parent who does not have a spouse that can act as their survivor and bring a claim, an adult's child in that situation is currently barred from pursuing a wrongful death claim, even if their parent was killed as a result of medical malpractice. So House Bill 6003 would sort of close that gap and allow parents of adult children without children of their own, or adult children of parents without a surviving spouse, to pursue wrongful death cases in cases of medical malpractice. So this is a bill that passed the Florida Legislature last year, only to be vetoed by Governor Ron DeSantis. So this is a bill that the insurance industry is very hostile to. And the governor last year decided to side with the insurance industry. I think part of that was driven by the feud between the governor and the House Speaker as well. This has been a bill the House Speaker has really pushed. So there was both political reasons and also financial reasons for the veto. It's not clear that anything has really changed, and it's also not clear. This was a very close vote in the Florida Senate last year. Technically, there was an amendment that would have really changed the dynamics around it. I mean, that just they were barely able to get this bill through that process. So unclear as to whether or not that will happen this year. If it does, you've still got to figure out a Ron DeSantis veto. Although this is one of those bills that it wouldn't shock me to see the governor flip on, just because nobody really wants to be on the side of supporting the free kill law. So the politics here are certainly complicated. So that'll be one to watch the rest of the session. But of the bills that went out Thursday, probably the only sure thing to pass is the bill written by the Mosaic Company, which again tells you all you need to know about the Florida Legislature as far as I'm concerned. Okay, we're gonna leave it there. We'll be back late Tuesday or early Wednesday with another daily update. Until then, please, however you're watching or listening, please click like or subscribe, both please. Leave a show rating or review. Those are really helpful. And if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for the newsletter. Easiest place to find us is at seekingrentsfl.com. That'll kick you over to the Substack where you can sign up to have all of our shows and podcasts emailed straight to your inbox. Everything is free. Subscriptions are free. Nothing's behind a paywall. But there is an option to voluntarily pay for a subscription if you can afford it. We sure do appreciate folks who choose to pay for their subscriptions. It helps us keep doing this and keep it all free for everybody else. So with that, thanks very much, and we'll talk again very soon. Take care.